You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, hey folks, welcome to your Thursday evening. This is Scotty Roberts. Thanks for being here. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and all the different places and outlets where you can hear the audio version of Intrepid Radio. And you can also come on over to my YouTube channel, join the live chat room filled with the other Intrepheads listening to this show tonight, commenting on it and many other things over at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. I want to thank you for being here today. I want you to check out a couple of things. Go check out John Penman Hats. I'm looking because I got to point my finger to the right place. Go to Penman Hats. That's penmanhats.com. And check out all the hats that he has to offer and the fine covers that you can buy for your head over at Penman Hats. And also, I want you to go check out my, if you see down here, it's over here, it's mirror reflection, Son of a Patriot. That's etsy.com/shop/Son of a Patriot. It's got all my t-shirt designs and stuff that we do for the different shows, for political things and all of that stuff. So go check out all my shirt designs. Avail yourself of some, like many of you over in the chat room have done already. So thanks for coming. Thanks for patronizing my things and my advertisers and my sponsors. And let's move on. I am not fully with it mentally today, so bear with me if I sound a little disjointed. It's because, well, frankly, I am. So my brain is a little muddled today. Got a couple of things going on, and it's got my head kind of... I don't have a headache. I'm just a little lightheaded. That's it. And all my thoughts are not coming together. So it should be an interesting show tonight for you to listen to. We're going to pick up where we left off last night about the Utes. And it was not Utes as in, like my cousin Vinny, they were disenfranchised Utes. No, not Youths, pronounced like you're from the Jersey Shore, but the Utes, the Indian tribe in Colorado and Utah. And that's over of course it's in the west of our country. And we're talking about how they were saying the Utes must go. And they had always been friends to the whites and never had any wars with the whites, but now they want their land, of course. And so we kind of left off. We were talking about how it was Johnson was a big Indian who was one of the Utes, and he went into the Indian agent, Meeker, who had been trying to transform them all into an agrarian culture, and not doing very successfully at it. And he was imposing his will, and he was trying to make the Indians in his image, which he believed he was made in God's image. That kind of an affair. And he's having problems with them because he's trying to do things like have them kill their ponies, and he suggests to Johnson that maybe the problem is not that I'm tilling up your grazing land for your ponies, but maybe you have too many ponies, so why don't you start killing some of them? And Johnson just kind of stared at Meeker like, are you a fucking idiot? He just looked at him and said, and finally got up, and according to Meeker's version, grabbed him by the shoulders, pushed him through the open door and out against the horse rail, the hitching rail on the front porch. And then he wrote off to say that he was being manhandled by Johnson. And he wanted to report this. And of course, Johnson's version was, I put my arm around his shoulder, and I told him, no, I'm not doing that. Now, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. I can't imagine that a big guy like Johnson maybe didn't want to do something more and just pushed him by the shoulders. That's maybe true. Johnson might not be telling the truth. I just put my arm around his shoulder. You know what? I got kids, and I know how people act. And so I think the truth is in there somewhere, but he didn't do him any harm, and he didn't really threaten him. And so before Meeker took any kind of action, he summoned Nakagat, Jack, to his office for a talk. And Jack later recalled the meeting by saying this. He said, "Meeker told me that Johnson had been mistreating him. I told Meeker that it was probably nothing, that it was a small matter, and he'd better just let it drop. Meeker said it didn't make any difference to him, that he would mind it and complain about it. And I still told him that it would be a very bad business to make so much fuss about nothing. And Meeker said he didn't like to have a young man take hold of him, and that he was an old man, he had no strength to retaliate, he didn't want to have a young man take hold of him in that way. He said that he was an old man and Johnson had mistreated him, and he would not say any more to him, and that he was going to ask the commissioner for soldiers, and that he would drive the Utes from their lands." So you see how he's taken this personal incident where he says, Johnson manhandled me, and now he wants to call in soldiers as a result of this incident to drive the Utes from their lands. And Jack goes on with his recounting of this, and he says, "Then I told Meeker it would be a very bad thing to do that. Meeker said that anyhow the land did not belong to the Utes. I answered that the land did belong to the Utes, and that was the reason why the government had the agencies there, because it was the Utes' land. And I told him again that the trouble between him and Johnson was a very small matter, and he'd better just let it drop and not make so much fuss about it." And this is part of the congressional documents, by the way. And so for another day and night, Meeker brooded over his deteriorating relations with the Utes, and then he finally made up his mind that he had to teach them a lesson. I got to teach these Utes a lesson. Look at that arrogance. This guy's an asshat. And so he dispatched 2 telegrams, one to Governor Pitkin asking for military protection, and another to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. Now, the Utes had never threatened him in any way. He just had Johnson. He had a misunderstanding with Johnson, and if Johnson did take him by the shoulders and push him against the hitching rail for suggesting that he kill all of his ponies, or some of his ponies, he's actually insulting what would be status amongst the Indian tribe. Now, the more ponies you had, and so Johnson didn't take well to that. So, Meeker writes, "I've been assaulted by a leading chief, Johnson, forced out of my own house and injured badly." Which, now you remember the incident? Even his original version of this, he took me by the shoulders and shoved me outside against the hitching post, and then didn't do anything to him. Now, he goes on in his telegram, "It's now revealed that Johnson originated all the trouble. His son shot at the plowman, and the opposition to plowing is wide, and plowing stops, life of self, family, employees not safe, want protection immediately, have asked Governor Pitkin to confer with General Pope." So now he's trying to turn this incident into, our lives are at danger, the Utes are going to start an uprising. Now, this is where we left off last night with that telegram. So during the following week after he sent this telegram, the ponderous machineries of the Interior and the War Departments slowly moved into action. On September 15th, Meeker received notice that orders were being transmitted to cavalry units to march to White River. The agent was authorized to arrest leaders in the late disturbance, as it's called, leaders, quote-unquote, leaders in the late disturbance. And this is part of the U.S. Secretary of the Interior report of 1879. So the War Department dispatches orders to Major Thomas T. Thornburg, commanding at Fort Fred Steele, and, quote, to move with a sufficient number of troops to the White River Ute Agency, Colorado, under special instructions, end quote. Because Thornburg was on an elk hunt, the orders were delayed in reaching him, and he didn't move out until September 21st, a week later. So for the 150-mile march to White River, he outfitted about 200 cavalrymen and mounted infantrymen. And on September 25th, Thornburg reached Fortification Creek, and the column was about halfway to the White River Agency, and the major decided to send one of his guides ahead to notify Meeker that he could reach the agency in 4 more days. And he asked Meeker to inform him of the current situation there. Now, it's a couple of weeks since Meeker had first sent out his telegram. And on that same day, Colorado and Nicagot, Jack, learned of the approaching soldiers. The Ute chiefs were moving with their people toward Milk River for the customary autumn hunts. Now, Jack rode north to Bear River and met the troops there. "What's the matter?" Jack asked them. "What are you coming for? We do not want to fight with the soldiers. We have the same father over us. We do not want to fight them." Now, Thornburg and his officers told Jack that they'd received a telegram to go to the agency that the Indians were burning up the forests around there and had burned Mr. Thompson's cabin, and Jack replied that was a lie. The Utes had not burned any forests or cabins. "You leave your soldiers here," he said to Thornburg. "I'm a good man. I am Nicagot. Leave your soldiers here and we'll go down to the agency." Thornburg replied that he had orders to march his soldiers to the agency, and unless he received word from Agent Meeker to halt the column, he would have to take the soldiers on to White River. Now, Jack again insisted that the Utes did not want to fight. He said it was not good that soldiers were coming into their reservation. Then he left Thornburg and hurried back to the agency to warn Nick Meeker. Nick, remember they called him that? Father Meeker, as he wanted to be called. He hated being called Nick, so the Utes called him Nick. To warn Nick that bad things would happen if he let soldiers come to White River. I don't think that was a threat. It was more, everything's going to go south. The whole situation's going to go bad if you let soldiers come here. And on the way to Meeker's office, Jack stopped to see Quinkent, or Douglas as he was known. They were rival chiefs, but now that all the White River Utes were in danger, Jack felt that the leaders must not be divided. And so the young Utes had heard too much about the white men sending them off to Indian territory. Some said they had heard Meeker boast that the soldiers were bringing a wagon load of handcuffs and shackles and ropes, and that several bad Utes would be hanged and others taken as prisoners. If they believed the soldiers were coming to take them away from their homeland, that they would fight them to the death. Again, this story we hear keep getting repeated over and over and over again. And not even the chiefs could stop the young men from fighting. So Douglas said that he wanted nothing to do with it. After Jack left, he put his American flag on a pole, mounted it above his lodge. Perhaps he had not heard about Black Kettle and Sand Creek, which we covered many weeks ago now, of the Cheyenne. Black Kettle was flying an American flag at Sand Creek in 1864, 15 years earlier, and they massacred people standing beneath that flag. So I told the agent Meeker that the soldiers were coming, Jack had said, and that I hoped he would do something to stop their coming to the agency. He said it was none of his business. Meeker, what a dick. What a spineless, unscrupulous dick. He said he knew nothing of the soldier business, and that he would have nothing to do with it. And then Jack said to Meeker, he then said, I would like he and I to go where the soldiers were to meet them. The agent said that I was all the time molesting him, and he would not go. This he told me in his office, and after finally speaking, he got up and went into another room and shut and locked the door. That was the last time I ever saw Meeker. Those were the words of Jack. So imagine this, you're the Indian agent, and one of the Indian chiefs comes to you and says, there's soldiers coming, let's go meet them, let's talk to them, let's talk this all through before there's bad things happening. And the Indian agent refuses to talk, denies that he had anything to do with soldiers coming, which was an out-and-out lie, and then just leaves the room and won't talk to you. He's not doing his job, first of all. And that's the least of all of his infractions there. And so later in the day, Meeker evidently changed his mind, and he decided to heed Jack's advice. So he sent a message to Major Thornburg, suggesting that he halt his column and then come to the agency with an escort of 5 soldiers. So even Meeker knew he was acting like an idiot. And so he had to do something to make sure he saved face, that he did not get into trouble here. And so he suggests that they come, that just the major come with 5 soldiers. The Indians seem to consider the advance of troops as a declaration of real war, he wrote. That was in his letter to the major. And this was, again, that quote, that letter is part of the U.S. Secretary of the Interior's report in 1879. All of this stuff is documented. So on the following day, September 28th, when the message reached Thornburg's camp on Deer Creek, Collabrow also arrived there to try to convince the major that he should proceed no further. I told him I did not know at all why the troops had come, Collabrow said afterward, or why there should even be war. The column was then only 35 miles from the White River Agency. So after reading Meeker's message, Thornburg told Collabrow that he would move his troops down to the Milk River boundary of the Ute Reservation. There he would camp his soldiers, and then he and 5 men would go on to the agency to confer with Meeker. Now, not long after Collabrow and his braves left Thornburg's camp, the major held an officers' meeting during which he decided to change his plans. Instead of halting on the edge of the reservation, the column would march on through to Coal Creek Canyon. This was a military necessity, Thornburg explained, because Collabrow's and Jack's camps were just below it. And so if the troops halted on Milk River and the Utes decided to block the canyon, they could keep the soldiers from reaching the agency. So from the south end of the canyon, however, only a few miles of open country would lie between them and the White River Agency. So, riding ahead of the column, Collabrow arrived at his camp about 9 o'clock in the morning of the 29th. He found his people very much excited over the approach of soldiers. I saw several start out in the direction toward the road where the soldiers were, he said. Afterward, I left also and came up to where the first ones who went out had gathered. And there he met Jack and about 60 of his warriors. The 2 chiefs exchanged information, Jack telling Collabrow about his unsatisfactory meeting with Meeker, and then Collabrow telling Jack that Major Thornburg had promised to halt his soldiers at Milk River. I then told Jack I thought it would be well for him to advise the young men not to make any warlike demonstrations at all, and he said it would be better to move them a piece off the road, as we yet saw no soldiers from where we were, and we retired some distance from the road. Jack then said that when the soldiers should have arrived at Milk River, the line of the reservation, he would go down and see them. Now, neither Collabrow nor Jack knew that Thornburg had changed his plans after he told Collabrow what he was going to do. And they had no idea that the column had already passed Milk River, and after watching his horses there, Thornburg decided to send the wagons along the canyon road with 1 escort troop, while he took the remainder of the cavalry over a more direct route across a high ridge. So by an irony of chance, this would bring them directly upon the angry Utes that Jack had drawn away from the road in order to avoid any possible encounter. So remember, they're saying, Jack said, I'm going to move my warriors, my angry young men, off of the road so there's no encounter. So he moves them back to the ridge, and what should happen? But Thornburg comes along the ridge with the cavalry. So about this time, a young Ute who had gone ahead to reconnoiter came galloping back. The troops are not stopping where they promised to stop yesterday, but are coming on, he told Jack. Now very much concerned, Jack started up the ridge with his small band of warriors, and in a few minutes he could see the soldiers' wagons strung out along the road that twisted through the sagebrush toward the canyon. I stood up on the hill with 20 or 30 of my men, and all at once I saw 30 or 40 soldiers to my front. And just as soon as they saw me, they deployed off one after another. I was with General Crook the year before fighting the Sioux, and I knew in a minute that as soon as this officer deployed his men out in that way, It meant fight. So I told my men to deploy also. Now, the officer commanding the advanced cavalry troop was Lieutenant Samuel Cherry, and after ordering his men to deploy, Cherry halted them at the base of the ridge and waited for Major Thornburg to come forward. Now, Thornburg rode out a few yards and waved his hat to the Indians watching from the ridge, and several waved back. Hey! So for 4 or 5 minutes, Jack waited for one of the officers to signal for a council, but they held their positions as though expecting the Utes to make the first move. Then Jack said afterward, I and another Indian went out to meet them. So Lieutenant Cherry dismounted and started walking toward the Utes. After taking a few steps, he waved his hat. A second later, a single rifle shot broke the silence. While we were still some distance apart between the skirmish lines, Jack said, a shot was fired. I don't know from which side it came, and in a second so many shots were fired that I knew I could not stop the fight. And although I swung my hat to my men and shouted, Don't fire, we only want to talk, but they understood me to be encouraging them to fight. And this, of course, this account is, again, it's all part of the U.S. Congressional Report, the 46th Congress, second session. And while the fighting grew in intensity, spreading to the wagon train which went into a corral defense, news of the encounter reached Quinquet, or Douglas, on the agency, and he immediately went to Nick, Meeker's office, and told him that the soldiers had come inside the reservation. Douglas was sure the Ute warriors would fight them. Meeker replied that he did not believe there would be any trouble, and then he asked Douglas to go with him the following morning to meet the soldiers. By early afternoon, all the Utes at White River had heard that the soldiers were fighting their people at Milk River. And about a dozen of them took rifles and went out among the agency buildings, shooting at every white workman in sight. This is what this has precipitated now. Now they're killing all the whites at the agency. So before the day ended, they killed Nathan Meeker and all his white male employees. They made captives of the 3 white women and then fled toward an old Ute camp on Pisiance Creek. I think that's the way you pronounce that. Piceansce. Pisiance or Piciance Creek. And along the way, each of the 3 white women was raped. So now you've got big trouble. For almost a week, the fighting continued at Milk River, with 300 Ute warriors virtually surrounding the 200 soldiers. Major Thornburg was killed in the first skirmishing, and when the fighting ended, his column had lost 12 killed, 43 wounded. 37 Utes died in what they believed was a desperate stand to save their reservation from military seizure and to keep themselves from being taken as prisoners to Indian territory. Now remember, how this is all getting started is that Meeker calls for troops to come in because Johnson pushed him against the hitching rail by the shoulders. And Meeker lied about that and said he was injured and that the Utes were shooting at them and so on, which hadn't taken place. So they're sending soldiers down. And Jack and the other chiefs are believing that the soldiers are coming to kill them. And so they start killing the whites. And then there are atrocities committed by even some of the Utes. They just started killing people. They killed Meeker, they killed the whites at the agency, and they raped the 3 women that they took. And as Jack had said to Meeker, if you bring soldiers, it's going to be bad business. It's going to be bad. Bad things are going to happen. That's exactly what happened. And that fighting went on for almost a week. And so at the Los Pinos Agency, 150 miles to the south, Chief Ouray heard of the fighting with dismay. We got to stop there for this first half. Guys, sit tight. We'll be right back and conclude this story of the Utes.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hello, my dad. So he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to me on my own show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio, and, of course, all the outlets where you can hear this show. You can also come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast in living color, and join the live chat room there, and filled with Intrepids. And you can join the lively conversations going on right now as I speak. It's happening. And you can join that conversation and watch the video. You know, there's not a whole lot to the video. I'm not showing any graphics or photographs today, although I may, if there's no time constraints. But come on over. Join us anyway. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, I have to, they say never apologize for anything, so I'm sorry, but I make no apologies. I'm a little drug-induced tonight, so I've got some things going on, and I got a little, I rarely take painkillers. I don't like them. I don't like to even take aspirin or ibuprofen or whatever all the other things are for pain, but I've got something. It's a little stronger. It's got me a little spinny-headed. So I'm still doing radio, though. I'm here. Look at me. Hey, I'm here. It's what I do. And so I want you to enjoy the show, but hopefully you won't have to listen back to it a second time to find all the mistakes I've made or all the misspeaks that I'm about to make. But we're going to pick this up where we left off after the first half. We've got all this bad business is now going on at the Ute Agency. And it's all because of Meeker. Now, yes, individuals are responsible for their actions. The individual Utes created, some of them did some very bad things. And they are bringing hell down on themselves with raping women, raping white women after taking them captive and killing the Indian agent, Meeker, and all the whites that were at the agency. This was not... There was nothing that really precipitated them to commit those kinds of actions. But Meeker did call in the soldiers. And what are the Indian tribes by this point? What have they learned when the soldiers come? You better be ready to fight, just in case. And the chiefs are still trying to talk with them, but that's all gone out the window now because of whatever happened when they tried to talk. A shot rang out. From which side, they don't know for sure. Probably from the Ute side, because you had some very angry young men, and that precipitated a week's worth of fighting. And so now they're down at the Los Pinos Agency. It's 150 miles to the south. That's where we are now. While the fighting's going on up at the Ute Agency. And Chief Ouray heard of the fighting with dismay. He knew that only immediate action could save his chieftainship and the entire Ute reservation. He dispatched a message by runner on October 2nd. It said this, his message: to the chief captains, headmen, and Utes at the White River Agency, you are hereby requested and commanded to cease hostilities against the whites, injuring no innocent persons or any others farther than to protect your own lives and property from unlawful and unauthorized combinations of horse thieves and desperadoes, as anything farther will ultimately end in disaster for all parties. And this was part of the U.S. Secretary of Interior's report in 1879. This is the message he sent. Now, Ouray, his message, and the arrival of the cavalry reinforcements ended the fighting, but it was already too late to save the Utes from ultimate disaster. Governor Pitkin and William Vickers had been flooding Colorado with wild atrocity stories, many of them aimed at the innocent I still have problems with this word because of the way it's spelled. Uncompagres. Uncompagres. Ucompagres. At Los Pinos. And they were spreading all these rumors. Governor Pitkin and William Vickers flooded, not rumors, but wild, atrocious stories of the actions of the Utes, most of whom were going peacefully about their business with no knowledge of what was even happening at White River. Now, Vickers called upon the white citizens of Colorado to rise up and, quote, wipe out the red devils, end quote, inspiring the frantic organization of militia units in towns and villages all across Colorado. Now, when your governor puts out a call for that, there's going to be some people, obviously, that have common sense and know better. There are going to be those that have heard of all the Indian wars in the previous year and two. And so what do you think is going to happen? Now you got what's going on at the White River Agency, the fight with the soldiers, the young Ute warriors taking captives and raping them. And on top of that, all the unmitigated lies and atrocious stories being spread by the governor, by the Indian Ring, by those who see a profit in the hills and the land owned by the Utes. Well, wipe out the red devils is a quote by the governor. That gives you an idea of what's going to happen. Inspiring the frantic organization of all these militia. So many newspaper reporters arrived from the east to report this exciting new Indian war, and that Governor Pitkin decided to give them a special statement for publication. Here's what Governor Pitkin said to the press. It would be like, the governor of any state standing in front of all the press nowadays to give their political statement on something. He said this, Pitkin, I think the conclusion of this affair will end the depredations in Colorado. It will be impossible for the Indians and the whites to live in peace hereafter. This attack had no provocation, and the whites now understand that they are liable to be attacked in any part of the state where the Indians happen to be in sufficient force. My idea is that, unless removed by the government, the Indians must necessarily be exterminated. I could raise 25,000 men to protect the settlers in 24 hours. The state would be willing to settle the Indian trouble at its own expense. The advantages that would accrue from throwing open of 12 million acres of land. Notice how he's already linking the land to the extermination of the tribe. The advantages that would accrue from throwing open of 12 million acres of land to miners and settlers would more than compensate all the expenses incurred. What do you think of that statement? What do you think of a governor who would say, what if a governor came out and said something like that today? We need to save our people and keep them safe from the devilish red man or the devilish whatever the opposition is. And we need to move them out of Colorado, or we need to exterminate them. And just think the advantage of the 12 million acres that would come open. Come on now. The White River Utes surrendered. By the way, that statement of Governor Pitkin's, you can find that written about by Robert Emmett in The Last War Trial, The Utes and the Settlement of Colorado. It's from Norman University Press. It was published in 1954. So the White River Utes surrendered their 3 women captives, and when the inevitable investigating committee was formed to sift the causes, fix the blame, and set the punishments. And the fight at Milk River was called, an ambush. Suddenly the Indians have ambushed the soldiers, which it was not. And the affair at the White River Agency was called a massacre, which it was not. Jack and Colorado and their followers were eventually excused from punishment on the grounds that they were warriors engaged in a fair fight. Douglas and the men at the agency were judged as murderers, but there was no one who could identify the Utes who had fired the shots that killed Nathan Meeker and his employees. So Douglas testified that he was in the agency's storeroom when he heard the first gunshot. I left the storeroom and went out a little way. Then I went to my house directly from where I was. When I started and got to my house, it made me cry to think into what a state my friends had fallen. Now, that was one of his statements. And this was in the U.S. Congressional Report. But because Arvilla Meeker, the wife of Father Meeker, Nick, swore in secret hearings that Douglas had forced sexual union with her, the 60-year-old chief was sent off to Leavenworth Prison. He wasn't charged. He wasn't tried for any crime. And a public accusation of rape would have caused embarrassment to Mrs. Meeker, and in that age of sexual reticence, the fact that the act involved an Indian made it doubly abhorrent. Think of, remember we talked about this book. It just pops into my mind, so I have to mention it. Remember the book To Kill a Mockingbird? And we talked about that a little bit last year, and I know most of you have either had to read it in school or have read it at one time or the other. And it's now banned in some schools, despite the message of the book, where a black man is being tried because he's accused of raping a white woman. And it was just something that was not done. Even if it was proven in court, proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he did not do this, that could not be done. A white jury could not release a black man from such a charge. If a white woman charged him, the black man was as good as dead, especially in the Deep South. And it was Atticus Finch, one of the main characters in the story, the father, that was the white attorney to defend him. That's probably why the book was banned. It was showing a white man trying to save a black man's life. But the story comes to my mind because it was an Indian and the woman claimed he raped her. Now, he says he didn't. But there was no trial. They just ship him off to Leavenworth. And they couldn't make it public because it was an Indian. So they couldn't have a trial. There should be no fair trial. It would embarrass the woman. Well, what if the woman wasn't telling the truth? Oh, the Me Too movement would be over all over, wouldn't they? So, individual punishments, however, were of little interest to miners and politicians. They wanted to punish the entire 7 nations of Utes. They didn't care about the rapes and who shot the first shot or who did what. They wanted all the Utes punished, to push them off of those 12 million acres of land that Governor Pitkin had linked to the atrocities committed and justice needed to be served. And there were 12 million acres of land waiting to be dug up, dammed up, and properly deforested so that fortunes could be made. And the Utes were standing in the way. And Ouray was a dying man in 1880 when the Indian Bureau brought him into Washington to defend the future of his people. Ill with nephritis, he bowed to the wishes of the Big Eyes Schurz and other officials who decided the Utes must go, as Governor Pitkin had said so much earlier, and to a new reservation in Utah, on land the Mormons didn't even want. So Ouray died before the army herded his people together in August of 1881 for the 350-mile march out of Colorado and into Utah, except for a small strip of territory along the southwest corner where a small band of southern Utes was allowed to live. Colorado was swept absolutely clean of Indians. Cheyenne and Arapaho, Kiowa and Comanche, Jicarilla And Ute, I think I pronounced it Jicaria, and the Ute, they had all known its mountains and its plains in Colorado, but now no trace of any of them remained. But their names, and that was all that was still on what has now become fully the white man's land. Now, I want to show you a few of these chiefs, because we've got a little bit of time to do this. Let's see if I can look them up for you. And I didn't prep this ahead of time, so I know this makes scintillating, riveting, live audio radio. But if you're watching, let's look up some of these people. I want you to see them, first of all. I want you to see Meeker, who is the Indian agent. And I'm going to see if we can find a picture of him. Does he even exist? Now, this is the dude who was trying to turn the Indians into the image of God. And this is the guy who had lied about them. Here he is. I found him. Nathan Meeker. And his name is Nick. And this is what the Indians called him. Let's. It's going to take me a minute to do some of these. But let's call him up. I want you to see who Meeker was and what he looked like. This is the guy that claimed that Johnson that had attacked him and that had injured him. He's the one that really precipitated this entire mess at the White River Agency. And here he is right here. Let's call him up. Here's Meeker. There he is, folks. That's the guy who came to instill upon the Indians the image of God. And he's the one who, I mockingly say that because he had no interest in helping them. He had interest in him doing what he believed he was supposed to do for the Utes. And the Utes, humored him a bit. But this is the guy who caused all the trouble right there. And some of the people involved, let me show you them as well. Let's see if there's a picture that shows them all. Let's see, who do we have in this picture? Oray, Pia, Uriah, Major Thompson. Oh, this is during the Bruneau Agreement in Washington, D.C., so they're not all in this picture. So I'm not going to grab that one. Let's look for some of these guys. And I know this is, for those of you listening, just listen in. We'll talk as we go. Let's look up, what was his name? Johnson. 1879 Ute. Let's see if he comes up. Let's see if I can find him here. Is this him? Ouray. Now here's Ouray. We talked about him. He is, and I'll give you a little bit more information about him here. But let me show you his image as we go on here. This is Ouray, and let me call his picture up. Hang on. Let's get rid of Meeker, and let's call up Ouray. It'd be good if I did this ahead of time, but I don't always think about it. So let's get Ouray in here. There he is. All right, this is Ouray. He was the chief, one of the last chiefs we talked about here, and there he is. He is one of the Utes, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about your Ouray that we perhaps didn't cover quite as tightly in this particular section, but he's the one who died in 1880 after he made his trip to Washington, and they moved all his tribe up into Utah. And he was a Native American chief of the Tabaguche, or the Uncompahgre, as I called them, band of the Ute tribe. And they were located in western Colorado, and because of his leadership ability, Ouray was acknowledged by the United States as the chief of the tribe of the Utes. And he traveled to D.C. at the end of his life to negotiate for the welfare of the Utes He was raised in the cultural diverse town of Taos, and Ure learned to speak many languages that helped him negotiate. And this is the guy we talked about early on in the story yesterday as well. And following what was called the Meeker Massacre by the Whites, the White River War, in 1879 he traveled to D.C. In 1880, and he tried to secure a treaty for the Uncompahgre Ute, who wanted to stay in Colorado. But the following year, the United States forced the Uncompahgre and the White River Utes to the West Reservations in present-day Utah. And he was known as the white man's friend, and his services were almost indispensable to the government in negotiating for his tribe. And although Ure sought reconciliation between different peoples, with the belief that war with the whites likely meant the demise of his tribe and the Ute nation, other more militant Utes considered him a coward for his propensity to negotiate, and they were disturbed by the treaties that Ure entered into with his brother-in-law, Hot Stuff, and tried to kill him with an axe during his near-daily visit to the Los Pinos Indian Agency in 1874. And so he was part of the Treaty of 1868. He was part of the Bruno Treaty of 1873. The Meeker Massacre, as it had come to be known. Tensions increased in the area, it says. Following the Meeker Massacre, and no understanding the Utes' love of horses, Nathan Meeker had used their racetrack had it plowed, and he tried to force the nomadic hunters and the gatherers to farm. Meeker sought military help, seeking peace. A tribe of Ute men led by Chief Douglas asked Meeker for peace, but a fight ensued, and this made further negotiations for peace between the Native Americans and whites very difficult. And we've seen by the Native American version of this event that they had gone out to parley, and as somebody fired a shot, it started, and then the Indian Utes back at the agency were the ones that killed Meeker and 7 other whites, and this is where Meeker's wife said that Douglas raped her, which was not true, and he ended up in Leavenworth. And so this is Meeker. I'm sorry, this is Ure, the chief who did a lot of negotiating with Meeker, and so you can see here that. First of all, I got to check my time here. We've only got a couple of minutes left. You can see here what happened over and over and over again. We've seen this repeated from the Navajo to the Apache to the Sioux to the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Kiowa. We've seen it now with the Nez Perce, now with the Utes. We're going to go and talk a little bit more about the Apache tomorrow. But this gives you an idea of the systematic conquering of the American West by the United States government, which, frankly, you hate to say it, it was part of the paradigm of how nations operated back then. The conquer and destroy. Would we have a different approach today if we were doing this now? I would like to think we probably would. But would we be the great continental nation that we are today? Probably not. So there is good that has come from the bad, but there's a lot of atrocity along the way. And what do you do about that now, knowing that now in present day? How are we supposed to act? What are we supposed to do? This is why I say I support Native American rights. I'm not about the idea of giving all the land back to them that we stole to make this nation. I am about upholding treaty rights, however. And I think that is a first good step to making things in the now. None of us were there when this happened. We're all in the here and the now. 150 years later, what do we do? What do we do now? We work to live together and make it work. And I think we see some first good steps taking place, and there's more to talk about with that. And my mind's a blur, so I'm not going to go into that much deeper. And tomorrow, we're going to start talking about the Apache, as I mentioned, and I'll just give you a little tease for tomorrow. We're going to talk about the last of the Apache chiefs. And I'll give you a good quote here that we can go on. And this is a quote made by a very famous Apache chief. His name is probably more well known than his deeds and his actions, and that's Chief Geronimo. And here's what he said. He said, "I was living peacefully with my family, having plenty to eat, sleeping well, taking care of my people, and perfectly contented. I don't know where those bad stories came from. There we were, doing well, and my people were doing well. I was behaving well. I hadn't killed a horse or a man, American or Indian. I don't know what was the matter with people in charge of us. They knew this to be so, and yet they said I was a bad man and the worst man there. But what had I done? I was living peacefully there with my family under the shade of the trees, doing just what General Three Fingers Crook had told me I must do, and trying to follow his advice. I want to know now, who was it that ordered me to be arrested? I was praying to the light and to the darkness, to God and to the sun, to let me live quietly there with my family. I don't know what reason was that people should speak badly of me. Very often there are stories put in the newspaper that I am to be hanged. I don't want that anymore. When a man tries to do right, such as stories ought not to be put in the newspapers. There are very few of my men left now. They have done some bad things, but I want them all rubbed out now, and let us never speak of them again. There are very few of us left." And that was Goyafle, and that's Geronimo, the last of the Apache chiefs. And we're going to talk about him tomorrow night. So thanks for being here tonight, folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience with me tonight. And I hope you have a good night, and we're going to take a 23-hour break, and we'll see you right back here.